Growing up as a little boy in Rillier, I loved reading books. Now, as a much older Cthulhu-Kin and no longer living in Rillier, I still loved reading books. But I have one of these little Kindles now that was gifted to me by a member of my family. I still buy books, but I also make it a point to get an e-copy and put it on there when I'm travelling on a train, or nautically. Is that a word? Doesn't matter. I do enjoy still to this day going into bookshops, perusing many different genres, because I always find a nice little gem that I can read whenever I'm bored, which hasn't been recently because I've been painting a drop pod. It's looking quite golden now. I'm close to finishing. Now, up till very recently, a friend of mine had been holding on to all of my books from my undergraduate years and a few years after, and he brought that along with my whiskey down. It was at that moment when I lifted up that box that I fully appreciated the muscles in my back. Oh, that box was heavy. I think my friend would have gotten a hernia if he'd tried it on his own. Now, the reason I bring all of this up is because there was an article I want to cover that this is somewhat relevant to, and there are quite a number of points I want to make about what has happened, and I want to make sure I get it absolutely right, because I don't want to be the 2015 me that would simply want to pwn because I see the word feminist in the article. We're going to be addressing two articles for this video that center around an iconic feminist bookstore in Oregon called In Other Words that is shutting down after 25 years. Now, you may all be thinking to yourselves, but why? Why would a feminist bookstore be closing down Omegon? Well, the answer is quite simple. The purpose of a business is to sell things. If you're unsuccessful in selling enough things, then you're out of business. Basically, lack of sales. It's why a lot of companies operate with KPIs or targets, because they expect you to hit a certain target for the business to still break even. Everything afterwards, there is a potential reward for certain employees that have that perk in their contract, unless you're a volunteer, 0-hour contract, or basic blue-collar worker. Now, this feminist bookstore has taken it upon themselves, via a statement that we will address soon, to blame white men for their shop not selling enough to then have to close down, but that's not the entire story. So we're going to read a piece from the Conservative Tribune, and it's going to become quite apparent very soon that this was obviously written by a conservative. Some of the language is quite funny. An iconic feminist bookstore and community space is closing. What could be the cause of this retailer's failure? People don't want to buy their books? Perhaps the rise of e-commerce, which actually, if anything, to me is one of the major reasons bookstores are closing. Not in the slightest, obviously, especially in Oregon of all places. I mean, it's not like it's a progressive hotspot. The problem lies in white power, patriarchy, and white cisgendered feminism. What's lovely here is that it's not just the fault of patriarchy. It's those damn non-intersectional feminists, or they are intersectional feminists, but because they're white, it's the whiteness that really is the problem here. That's the takeaway from a statement posted last Monday announcing the closing of In Other Words, a volunteer-run bookstore made famous by the television show Portlandia. According to Oregon Public Broadcasting, the store will be closing at the end of this month, and it's all the fault of you blue-eyed devils. I love that language. One of the things that struck me is that with bookstores, feminist targeted, feminist creating, feminist targeted, whatever, bookstores, or anything with the word feminist in its name, it supposedly churns out progressive values and ideas. So when it comes across something that is conservative, that conservative or conservatism values or conservatism are deemed to be regressive because there's a certain air of traditionalism in that, and tradition is considered regressive. And I think that's quite fascinating. But I don't know where it's progressive to not take responsibility for your mistakes. The very heart of a good business model would be to succeed. How do you succeed? You target your business to the audience round you, so that you are able then to maximize your profits. That is the point of a business after all. And that's certainly what bookshops in my town have done. It's the same with bakeries. When products don't sell, they then focus on other products that sell more and put those out instead. Bookshops are the same. In my town, sci-fi books, fantasy, very popular, so they are at the front at all times in very shiny, colourful books, which gets all the children and nerds' attentions. You can tell who the nerds are. They're the bald ones with the comb-overs. It's quite tragic. Now, if you're failing because you don't sell, what are you? People still come into your store, they read your books, but they don't buy them. What is your business? It's not a business, it's a library. In which case, you need to then change your business model or apply for the correct license to maybe get some government funding. Unless, of course, that goes against a certain aspect of your model where you rail on capitalism, which, in your rather delightful statement, well, we find out on the Oregon Public Broadcasting, you pretty much blame capitalism. So let's have a look at that, because this is glorious, and it should, of course, be addressed. The current volunteers and board members stepped into and took over a space that was founded on white cis feminism. It's really difficult, actually impossible, for us to disentangle from that foundational ideology. Patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism cannot be reformed and ever serve the people. Abolition is the goal. If the full sentence read, abolition of our business because our business model was flawed from the offset, is the goal, then you would have hit it absolutely on the head to perfection. Because, of course, if you can't survive in a patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalist, male tiers environment, then perhaps you need to either relocate to somewhere where there is no capitalism, or rebuild the business as something new, something that might get people interested, like how everyone was totes interested in feminist pornography and feminist beer, because that'll sell well, said no one ever. Now, the space that was being used, it originally started in a different area of Portland. Originally it was located on southeast Hawthorne, now in northeast Killingsworth. It has been in continuous operation for 25 years. The board said increased expenses and lack of funds and volunteers made operations impossible to continue, admitting that it is not sustainable for the people who come here and work to provide this space as a resource to Portland feminist communities. Here's your problem. Clearly, you're appealing to a very small demographic, potentially a big demographic, but you're not actually getting them involved. You're not doing enough, you're not being proactive enough to make them want to come to your space, especially if they all could just sit in Starbucks, sipping on some randomly flavoured latte, writing a screenplay. Ironically, of course, because isn't that entire state full of hipsters? Matt Jarbo. Maybe he's being chunky, ironically. Who knows? In recent years, the focus of the community space has been welcoming groups like AA meetings, rock camps for girls, to anti-racist activism. I don't see how that's going to be a moneymaker, unless it's a point that people have to donate to you mandatorily. Mandatorily? Unless it is mandated that people donate to you. I think it's fantastic to help communities, of course, but it doesn't sound like the most inclusive thing. AA, of course, that is something else entirely. I'm not going to touch that. But rock camp for girls, anti-racist activists. Now this depends on what falls into the bracket of anti-racism. The rock camp for girls bit, we all know how that's exclusionary and quite frankly stupid if it's not going to be truly inclusive to all. Much like the Boy Scouts of America, which is just now called America. The rock camp should just be called rock. And the anti-racist activism should be welcoming to all minorities, but not that pesky majority, because reverse racism doesn't exist. And anyone who is white that thinks they've been a victim of racism should just be allowed down one of the doors near the end where it just says KKK meetup. Hey, how's that sound? I'm helping you here. I'm a problem solver. Anyway, I think I've made my views on this quite simple. If you want to succeed as a business, no matter what kind of business you are, you have to appeal to people. If you have the demographic but they're still not going, then you either adapt or you change your business model entirely to welcome other types of people in. There's somebody in this article that's mentioned called Carmen Shizwiso, a former board member, who talked about her upbringing. She went to a small private high school, grew up in a conservative community, and said that that bookstore was a huge part of that intellectual awakening. I'm sure it was, because you come from conservative values to then read very, quotes, progressive values in books. I'm sure that it was quite an eye-opener for you. But if you're willing to simply believe what they wrote, then perhaps you were never meant to be successful. Which is probably why your business failed, really, if all you do is pay attention to those books. I don't know where I'm going with that thought. There was something there and I've lost it. Doesn't matter. Personally, I think if you're ever going to make a business and you want to succeed, appeal to as many different types of people, but try and stay true to your values. But as your values are very much against certain ideas, like capitalism, which you have claimed cannot be reformed, although you've not really explained how it doesn't work for you. Although I would argue you don't work for capitalism. I'm not sure I can expand on that. No, I can. You've got to make capitalism work for you, so you have to make yourself as inclusive as possible. Surely feminism would want to do that. But you don't need to use the word feminist, which has put a lot of people off wanting to engage with feminists. It's why people rebrand themselves and ditch the word feminist. You don't have to declare yourself a feminist or try and entrap people by saying if you believe in equality, you're a feminist. At this point, it may as well start to die. I'm not saying people should forgo feminism entirely. That's a different argument. But as we've seen, there are feminists around the world who are saying, please, Western feminists, stop. You're making us look bad. I got sidetracked by a thought. Doesn't matter. I hope this has been highly educational for all of you. I hope you all also have a lovely Sunday, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, goddowns.
Imagine my shock